Amen. So we're continuing our walk through. Today we're talking about the ascetics, um, the the these pathways as we've talked about. They have particular names to them, and it talks about their strengths and their strengths and their all of their um, downfall, not back or faults or whatever the name is. I'll get it later on. But hopefully, as we're making this walk and you're learning more about yourself and how you were designed to connect to God, that you'll learn also how some of those traits that you have within you, even though it may not be your dominant pathway or your dominant trait. And that's okay, you know, because we each have a little bit of each one of the pathways in us. And you can determine how, if you want to try to develop that and look further into it, or just stick with your dominant one. It's all up to you. The assessment, I hope that you've done it. If you haven't, that you know you still have time to do it, and hopefully you're looking at whatever that assessment is and uh, helping that, allowing that to help you along your pathway. The book itself is there, great information in it that goes beyond the handout that we have. So I encourage you, if you can, to get the book itself, and then you can read more into it because he goes deeper into each one of the depths, or deeper depths, I should say, into each one of the pathways individually. So I encourage that as you're continuing your own spiritual journey. Um, I'm sharing my screen so we have the same material. Let me know if anybody doesn't have the material and make sure you get it. Today we're talking about ascetics, people who love God through solitude and simplicity. During this time, particularly during the pandemics, the ascetics ought to be just reveling and just excelling. I think I saw a couple of funny things on Facebook where it said the people who were normally the introverts are just having a ball right now, during this time, but the extroverts are suffering. They're looking out, they're dying to get outside and dying to connect and dying to get back out and do the things they were doing before. Um, so we want to and recognize, the ascetics during this time probably doing great. Those are probably the people that are just loving it, looking around, saying, what's the problem? I'm good with this. Uh, but and we each probably have a little bit of it. May not be your dominant characteristic, but we each have a little bit of this, and we'll see that as we go through the lesson. Um, the ascetic temperament. I'm just going to go through some of these points here, and who are we? Feel free to let me know if you have any comments or questions while I'm going through this. Like I said, I'm not going to read every single point up in here. So if there's something that I missed, feel free to join in. And Miss Kim jumps in and says she's a happy introvert. Amen. And God loves and created the happy introvert. So it's good that we have those who are embracing this time. It can be a lesson for all of us who may not be, who this may not be your dominant temperament, but there may be lessons to learn during this time as well. The ascetic temperament gravitates towards solitude, austerity. There's your word for the morning. Simplicity and deep commitment. It represents believers who are not afraid of discipline, severity, and solitude. It is similar to the monastic lifestyle or those of a monk. Now, no one goes into the monk lifestyle full force. There's some, particularly in early church history, who really adorned or really embraced, I should say, the monastic or the monk lifestyle. And ascetics do that to a certain extent, maybe not as much as they did in early history, but they still do, and they are not afraid of that lifestyle. To tell someone nowadays to live that way would scare them, or at least put them off a little bit. Um, austere. The word means morally strict, somber, grave, unadorned, or simple. And those words can be a little scary to most of us. Discipline, we're not big fans of. Severity, not big fans of. Solitude, not big fans of. So a lot of these words to the majority of us may not appeal very much, and and so we may not ascribe to this temperament very well. But if you look deeper into the words, they point out a part of our life that that most of us should have, at least to a certain extent, because discipline is the hallmark of a disciple. In fact, you can't even be a disciple without discipline. There has to be discipline in it. So if we're disciples of Christ, then there has to be some level of discipline. For the ascetics, they're the ones that embrace that. And maybe not all of us do, but the ascetics definitely do. Uh, Somber, that word there, I had to look it up because, man, talk about somber and stuff. It's like, okay, that's probably not going to help me very much. But somber just means serious. That these are people who are serious and they take their commitment to Christ seriously. And this is how they will demonstrate that deep commitment to Christ through a life of solitude, through a life of simplicity, and they do it not because it's forced, but they do it because they're just naturally drawn into it. Grave means weighty. Grave can have the meaning of being dark, and it does have those meanings, but it means weighty. It means that the ascetic recognizes the weight of their commitment and takes it seriously. Recognizes the weight of what it means to be in a relationship with God, and is willing to do whatever he or she has to do in order to embrace and um, nurture that relationship. So they take on the weight. They recognize the weight of the relationship. It reminds me of when Jesus was talking to the spiritual leaders in Matthew chapter 23, and he told them, he says that you'll tithe to the anise and cumin, you'll tithe right down to, to the very nth degree of your tithe, yet you neglect the weightier matters of the law, faith, justice, and mercy. These things you should do without neglecting the others as well. And so I think that ascetics are great at recognizing the weightier side of a relationship with God, and they won't neglect it while trying to live another life. We've talked about several times about having the dual lives, the Monday through the Sunday life, and then the Monday through Saturday life. Ascetics are the ones who understand that weight and understand the gravity of that, of what it means to be in this deep commitment, in this relationship with God. And they'll make the changes that are needed to be made so that they have that consistent lifestyle, not just on Sunday, but all throughout their week as well. Most of our solitude is forced, not chosen, sort of like during the pandemic time right now. So, because it's forced and not chosen, it creates loneliness rather than spiritual intimacy with the Father. For the ascetic, they will choose solitude, whether for a short period of time or a longer period of time, but they'll do it. And when they choose the solitude on their own, then it opens the door for intimacy, spiritual intimacy with the Father. That's how they see it. For most of us, solitude means punishment. That's punishment. Especially if it's forced on me, then it doesn't create a place for spiritual intimacy. It makes me feel it opens the door for loneliness. And so ascetics understand that, and they uh, the embrace solitude as a door into spiritual intimacy with their Father. And for them, it's a good thing. Um, the author wrote something in Ascetics that I wanted to share. This is the rest of that quote that's in the notebook. I think there's a quote on the screen now. I'm trying to get good at this sharing. I hope I share it right. Is there a quote? I changed screens. Do y'all see the new screen that came up? Yes. Okay. Thank you. So it says, and this is the quote from that chapter on the ascetics. He went a little bit deeper into it. Most of our solitude is forced, not chosen, creating loneliness rather than spiritual intimacy with the Father. And our culture is anything but morally strict. We gravitate toward the trite and trivial rather than the somber and grave. And we pride ourselves on adornment and complexity rather than simplicity, often because many of us are trying desperately to hide our true self. Ascetics, perhaps more than any of the other spiritual temperaments, excuse me, must truly go against their culture to practice loving God. So this is kind of gives you more of a deeper insight into this pathway, the ascetics. They have to go against culture, who love, like you said, the adornment and the complexity, but they like the complexity, or I'm sorry, the simplicity. They like the weight. They like the gravity of the situation. They embrace the discipline. They embrace the things that other people don't embrace. The author was talking about he was jogging with his friend, and the streets were empty. Um, and they came to an intersection, and there's no cars on the road, and there's the walk sign in the crosswalk. They get ready to cross a street, and the crosswalk sign has the red hand up and saying "Don't cross." Well, because it was at an hour where there was nobody out there, just those two jogging, the author keeps on jogging, right through the intersection and keeps on going. His friend, however, stayed there on the corner, waiting for the hand to change or waiting for the light to change. Now, mind you, there's no cars around, but for the ascetic, that's important to follow the rules, even if no one's around, even if no one's looking, even if there's no cars coming. I won't cross until the light tells me to cross. Ascetics are those who will drive the speed limit um, when no one else is driving the speed limit. Why? Because that's just the rules. That's just the way. They discipline themselves to follow the rules, and that comes in later on in one of the ways to follow through with this is through obedience. Ascetics embrace the obedience because they understand how obedience can help and nurture my relationship with God. So, get back to ascetics take on or would be more apt to take on the Nazarite vow. Um, I don't know if you can read about it in Numbers chapter 6 uh, about the Nazarite vow. For a period of time, certain people were called to take on the vow where they didn't cut their hair, they didn't drink alcohol, they didn't touch dead bodies, and so it was the outward sign of them being set apart for a special purpose. Ascetics will embrace that. Most of us will not, but maybe to some extent. We can, we may not, but ascetics will thrive in that type of disciplined lifestyle, particularly the one that's showing me to be set apart for a special purpose. Um, Jesus practiced this. John the Baptist practiced this. He taught his disciples to kind of embrace this as well. Um, when you go out, there should be a rhythm of going out and into society, doing what God has called you to do, and then coming back into solitude. And Jesus practiced it many times throughout his ministry, and again, like I said, taught his disciples to do the same. Um, I saw you on mute, Pastor. Did you have something?
Oh, no, sir. No, sir.
Okay, you're back again. All right. So again, this is part of something that was taught, something and I believe that Jesus even recognized that maybe all of his disciples weren't ascetics per se, but still there's some practices that we can learn from that can help us in our pathway and in our walk with God. Anyone who has been stretched in ministry knows that Jesus' real battle over facing the cross was fought in Gethsemane. He finally won by choosing to be obedient. Um, that's where if you read that in Matthew chapter 26, it's in all the Gospels, but Matthew chapter 26 is where the author is referencing, where Jesus is wrestling with his own self to come in line to be obedient with the Father. And this is, I believe, what the ascetic why the ascetic will be is more apt to have a life of discipline, because they recognize the gravity of coming in, of lining their will up with the Father, and they're willing to go through the discipline or whatever it takes in order for that to happen. So Jesus is praying, "Oh my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, but nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. And so it's a matter of choosing to be obedient and aligning our will up to the Father, or submitting our will to the Father. And that can be challenging at times. And that's probably where our biggest battle is. I know that when I've received an assignment from God, um, I find that it's a little bit more challenging for me to line my will up with his command than it is to actually do what he asked me to do. Once I actually do it, I'll find out, oh, it wasn't that bad. But the challenge was lining myself up, because when I first, sometimes the things he tells me to do, I've got 1,000 questions for him. Why is this? How is this? And are you sure? And also, I've got all these questions, so I'm wrestling with on all that time. And then when I actually say yes and actually do it, I find out, oh, that wasn't that bad. So sometimes the real struggle isn't in actually doing it. Sometimes the struggle is lining ourselves up and determining at that point that I'm going to be obedient, that I'm actually going to do what God has told me to do. And that's where the author is saying that the real struggle, it was or the real victory was Gethsemane, was where Jesus decided, Father, let that nevertheless let your will be done. The ascetics recognize that, and that's where they're trying to get to. So their life of strict moral discipline and severity and solitude, those things strengthen them to be able to make that decision. Naturalists might go to a beautiful countryside, but ascetics may seek a barren wasteland, which would freak me out. Like, why would you go there? There's nothing to look at. There's nothing to see. But for the ascetic, that's what they want. They want those things that are not going to draw their attention away from God. They want the simplicity. They want to go into a room, and there's no decoration. It's very um, simple, very simple. It may not be anything in it. White walls, maybe a chair, and that's about it. And for the ascetic, that'll be great. That'll be fine. Nothing to take them away or draw them away from God. There are the ones, remember we talked about sensate Christians, who flow through their senses. They need that sensory. So they need the things to see. They need the things to smell. They need the things to hear. They need all of that sensual stimulation. Nothing wrong with that. That's just how they were designed. The opposite of that in this sense are the ascetics, who don't need any of that. And less is more. The less you give me, the more I can focus on God, and then there's nothing that distracts me from that. Any comments or questions? I know I'm going on so far. Any comments or questions thus far? Let me stop right here before I continue on.
I do.
Go ahead.
I'm kind of a combination of the aesthetics and the traditionalists,
Okay.
because I love nature, but I also love my solitude.
Okay.
So it's dual with me.
Right. And you'll find that. And actually, yeah, you'll find that. Is that like, are they tied like your for strength numbers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You'll
Yeah.
find that. You'll find that. And so what that helps you to see is that there's different ways that that they're never going to conflict. I need us to understand that. They're going to work in concert with one another, because the whole goal of them is to draw us into, to help us to determine how we were designed to connect to God. And so if we're not in conflicting with each other, it just gives me another path to him.
Exactly. Yes.
So if I'm not connecting to him through the traditionalist way, then I know that I've got the ascetic as well. And so it depends on the season that you're in or the situation
Exactly.
you're going through, which pathway do you take?
Right. And that helps. It does, really does.
Good. Because that's kind of maybe the overarching point of this whole study, is to help us to see and help us to determine which pathway we have. And if we have a couple of pathways, isn't it better to have a couple of ways to get to a destination than just one single way?
That's personality.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have one single way of getting to work. But what do you do when they close that road off for construction?
Right.
You know,
Always an alternative.
yeah,
Always.
always an alternative. There's another way to do it, another way to get to God. And so maybe you recognize one, but you didn't recognize the other. So now you can use in this class. Hopefully, will help you to see ways that you can press into the way that you never even thought of before.
Exactly. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the comments. Anybody else?
So good morning again, everyone. You know, when I look at this, and I am not ascetic, even though I can appreciate quiet time like the best of them. You know, what really draws to my attention is, and stop me if I'm getting too far into where you're going, but the balance between, or the danger between, isolation and solitude.
Yeah, and
They
we're gonna get there.
Okay, I'll pause then.
That's okay. No, that's good. I'm not surprised that you would jump in, because that naturally thought of, because when I think about, and the author made the point when he said that, when he talked about solitude and isolation, when I heard isolation, my mind was like, what? You know, so and there is a difference, and yes, we'll get into that as we go on, because that is one of the pitfalls, and we do have to be careful of that. Anybody else? Amen. So, where was it? In the sensate, Christian asceticism doesn't seek suffering or self-denial as an end, but as a means, as a way to love something else that God, as a way to love something else that God might be loved for. So, the person that is the ascetic doesn't, like I said, leans into the discipline, doesn't mind, doesn't recognizes that being a disciplined follower of Jesus Christ is going to naturally bring suffering. Suffering is another word we don't like. We try to minimize suffering. We try to avoid suffering. We try to get around it somehow, but it's part of being a disciplined follower of Jesus Christ. The ascetic is the one who recognizes that, and they don't seek it out, but when it happens, they understand that it is a means to an end. It's not an end in and of itself. So they don't put themselves in a place, they don't naturally embrace self-suffering so that they can draw attention to themselves. And Jesus kind of addressed this with his disciples in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 6, when he was talking about how when you fast, wash your face, lotion, do your hair, you don't have to, let everybody know I'm fasting. We don't do it so that people can see it. He said, if you're doing it that way and people see you, then you have your reward. For the ascetic, they recognize that their reward doesn't come from man, and so they're not doing it as a means to try to earn love from God, to try to earn anything from God. They're just doing it because they love God. Ascetics stress deeds before words. Um, your actions speak louder than words with the ascetic, because again, very serious. They recognize the commitment, the gravity of the situation. So it's about deeds. Preach a good message to me, but I need to see you living it, and I'm going to live it myself. So if I'm living it, I definitely need you to. Definitely need to see you live it. True ascetics are strict with themselves, but treat others with supernatural gentleness. So I'm strict with myself, but I'm not going to be judgmental about you. So I'm ascetic. I love this, the solitude, the simplicity, the discipline, all of those things. I'm not going to look down on you if you don't. I'm not going to, oh well, I can't listen to you, or I don't come at you, hitting you with the word. We got to be so careful with that. I wish we as Christians would stop cutting each other with the word. But the ascetic won't do that. The ascetic won't attack somebody else because they don't embrace all of this lifestyle the way they do. So that's what I love about the genuine ascetic, the true ascetic, that the author says there. Strict with themselves, but they're not going to be judgmental. So they want to follow the speed limit. That's great, but they won't get mad at me if I don't. They won't look down on me if I don't. So uh, they what did we was meekness, meekness, power under control. So they understand what that is, but they don't take it out on other people. Questions or comments for so far before we go into the pitfalls? So, what are the pitfalls? Overemphasizing personal piety. Instead of outward displays of piety, God calls people to administer true justice by showing mercy and compassion. Our need for spiritual refreshment must be balanced with our obligation to reach out to others. So we don't want to, the ascetics, you have to be careful. Don't get so caught up in your own personal piety that you're not ministering to other people. You don't want to be so heavenly bound that you're no earthly good. There are things that you're blessed to be a blessing. When you're in that place of solitude and you're following that strict life and that disciplined life, and it draws you closer to God, then use that intimacy and that closeness with God to develop those characteristics that are going to help you to bless and reach out to others. You're not just all to draw it in for yourself, keep it for yourself. God is strengthening you to bless others. You don't seek pain for its own sake. This is not about masochism. It's not about just doing things so people can see me. It's not just about doing things so I can draw attention to myself, so people can say, my goodness, how holy and how righteous and all, it's not about me. And so for the ascetic, you have to be careful that we're not just doing this disciplined life so that we can draw attention and accolades for ourselves. We never use it to seek God's favor. It is futile to try to win God's approval or forgiveness. There's nothing we can do to make God love us anymore. He already loves us with an absolute and complete love. So we operate in that love, not to earn it, but just to operate in it because he's given it to us. So we operate out of a place of love and not out of trying to earn anything from him. Suggestions. There's creative for solitude. Create a prayer room in your home. See if your church will give you the keys to the sanctuary to get away and pray. Good luck with that one. Learn to live in detachment within society. Even though you may not be able to detach yourself from society, which was never the goal. We're never to detach ourselves from society. Understand that we're in the world, but we're not of the world. So ascetics are great at learning how to be in society and in wherever they are, but spiritually be able to detach and to keep that connection with God vibrant. Arrive early to work or class, to be alone. And the author actually talked about the point, that pastor that you were making, that solitude is for when it's forced. When it's the forced solitude, it leads us to loneliness. But when I choose to be solitude or be in solitude, it's so that I can connect to God. That's the purpose for it. What do I need to do in order to get to God, to connect with him? For some people, and we've seen other spiritual temperaments and there's different things that they do. For the ascetic, it's getting away. It's detaching and learning the reason for why I'm detaching. The author calls solitude a tool to recharge. Solitude is a tool to recharge, so that I can recharge to go back into the world and do what he's called me to do. And so there's a rhythm with that. I do that, and of course, when you're connecting to people and doing what he tells you to do, it drains you. So you got to go back for the ascetic. You got to go back into solitude. You got to recharge. You got to get your energy back. And then once you're good, you go back again. You don't stay in the solitude. Okay, I'm just gonna stay here, and I'm not gonna move. I'm not gonna do anything. It's gonna be just me and you, Jesus. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. That's not what the true ascetic will gravitate toward. Austerity. Be very simple. I love this example. Susanna Wesley frequently pulled her apron over her head and prayed. And when her kids saw it, they learned not to bother her during that time. For those of you with kids and you got people around you, that was just her example. That's the way she separated herself so that she could pray. And the kids recognize that, and mama's got an apron over her head. I'm sorry, it's just a funny visual for me. Woman sitting in the kitchen with her apron over the kids and over her head, and the kids are like, "Mama's praying, leave her alone." So whatever you have to do, go into the restroom. Sometimes, going to the restroom is the only time that you have to yourself if you have a house full of people. So maybe you have to have the restroom ministry. I don't know, but you have to figure out how you can separate yourself so that you can have that connection to God. Strictness. Ascetics are strict only because they want to reserve their time and energy to passionately pursue God. They're not strict because, again, they're not trying to draw accolades for themselves. It's so that they can pursue God. They will fast. They will deny themselves. All the other things that we embrace, food, entertainment, all those things, the ascetic has embraced that lifestyle of denying themselves. That why? So they can connect to God. That's how they show their pursuit of God, or that's how they show their appreciation for Him in their relationship. Some Christians have found the middle of the night to be one of their best times of prayer and worship. For you insomniacs, that's a good time to pray and to worship. It might be how God, maybe not, it doesn't mean that you're an ascetic, but God maybe called you into a period of asceticism, at least during that time of not being able to sleep. Try to be silent for a few hours at a time. Has anybody ever tried this before? Just to be silent. Just try not to think of anything. That is not easy. That is not easy. That is one of the hardest things I've ever tried to do in my life. And the harder I tried to make myself stop thinking about stuff, the more things I kept thinking about. So it's not an easy thing to do. The ascetic can go right into it and be good at it. I'm not quite there. I'm not quite there, but that might be something that you want to try, just to test yourself. How well can you just be quiet? How well can you quiet yourself and be silent? It said a few hours at a time. You can try 10, 15 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, and build up from there. Personal retreats for several hours, an afternoon, day, weekend, whatever time. Personal retreats, or ascetics love them because, again, that's the time to disconnect. If you can't get away for long periods of time, there can be a short periods of times and work up. When sickness, heat, cold, hunger, or tiredness come, you can either adopt a demanding spirit and stunt your spiritual growth, or embrace them, learn from them, and mature in your faith. Your attitude will make all the difference. For the ascetic, those harsh conditions, they don't have a problem with those as much as most people do. They embrace them because they realize that those conditions are helping them to grow and helping them to mature. So they will embrace them when other people will shy away from them. We want, and the author said it beautifully. It said that we refuse small discomfort and we demand immediate relief. So that's how most of us view harsh conditions or hardship. We don't embrace it, and then we demand immediate relief. And so for the ascetic, they understand that in those moments I can be disciplined, and that can draw me closer to God. Again, we don't all think like that, but for the ascetic, that is something that they do embrace. Amen. So that's all the material that's there. I'm going to stop the recordings in case those want to share. For those that are on the replay, thank you for being here for Ascetics. Join us next week as we talk about those that talk about the activists, those that like to go out and do things. We're going to talk about activists next week. There's a beauty in that as well. So thank you for being here for that, and I pray that you'll come back and share with us again.